Thank you. We've got a microphone. We are being the media. This is your chance to speak to me and the rest of the planet, but you have to come up here and use the microphone because we're making a movie. So if you have any questions, comments, demands, criticisms, accusations of treason, don't raise your hands, step up, stretch your legs. Hi.
I have a group and I've been monitoring and not being
He's speaking, but it's not working.
It will be. There you go.
You were the murkiness of the War Powers Act, the murkiness of the Jubilee II of the Congress War Powers Act, and the overthrow of the veto by Nixon. You know, a strong Republican Congress voted against veto. I've been following, my group has been following the non-compliance issues with the two of Bush, the no scope of duration, the not reporting, et cetera, and now the same things happen. We're trying to encourage people not to call it a war because, you know, it's 10740 was just a use of military force, which you mentioned nicely has been eroded and elastically stretched. And I spoke with Alan before his first election, and not to characterize it, because we say war, and then it brings in this whole patina. It's not a war. It's something that is not. If you look at I'm sure you have, the 740. It deals with this egregious allowance. And you mentioned Barbara Lee. She was the only congressperson that voted against it, and she said it's no Pandora's box. So it's not a criticism, but when we and especially with your assessment of escalation is a direct violation of the War Powers Act, Section 3.4. And I brought this up. Alan and his office surprisingly sent me a copy of the War Powers Act that had that redacted. I don't know why. About when troops are set in for combat, how it says. So we're trying to encourage people not to call it a war because, as you rightly said, it's an occupation. We're sending things into Pakistan, we're summarily executing people, collateral, et cetera. So by calling it a war, we give it something that people can take to put a cloud over what's going on. Escalation. Bush called it a surge, and I said, "Oh, that's great." It's a semantical issue. So that's just basically it. I like what you're saying, but the minutiae of everything is that if you look at the Crystal's 60-page thing that just came out, there are 13 resolutions at the end of it, he attributes to our being there through UN resolutions. He does not mention any U.S. resolution, any declaration. So everyone's calling it a war. They make it look like a war, they make it act like a war, but in reality it's an occupation, so there are certain collateral things. Is that too much, or is that too little?
No, I appreciate your comments, and I think it's extremely important that occupations be referred to as occupations. I don't think it's extremely important that they not be referred to as wars, but I also don't think it's a silver bullet to solve anything that we call it by the best word possible, that we're really going to end it. In fact, I think that those on the left in this country very often have fallen into this pattern encouraged by masterminds of good framing of messages to think that we don't speak well enough about things, we don't call them the best names, and that's why our messages aren't on the televisions, whereas actually the television companies are owned by corporations who oppose us, and these Neanderthals who can't string 6 words together are dominating the televisions. Is not because we can't get our words into the ideal form. So I don't think it's going to solve much to get the best wording, but I'm willing to agree with you that war, one word alone doesn't sum it up perfectly. I don't think any other one word does. I think that when you say global war on terror, you are just announcing some sort of action against an emotion or a technique, and thereby justifying all the powers that go with war and all the stripping away of rights that are usually justified by war. And when you talk about seizing people on the battlefield and locking them up in your death camps, In most cases, there wasn't any battlefield. Even when there is, it's in today's world, it's mostly occupied by civilians. Most of our wars consist of bombing people from the air. So you look at Pakistan right now, you can't call it an occupation because there's not a mass of troops there occupying it. From our perspective, we don't call it a war because they're not white English-speaking Christians there dying. But from the perspective of the people on the ground, it sure as hell looks like a war. You want to call it something else, I don't care, as long as we end it.
Well, I mean, what you're saying, it's not the end-all be-all, but for instance, I can't remember who said it early on, that when we declared war against, after Pearl Harbor, we did not declare war on sneak attacks. You know, the ludicrous because it was a sneak attack, and we declared war, and everyone talks about, well, you don't have an enemy, you have these things. If you look at Obama's, I don't know if you look at Obama's, some of the proffering to keep detention people in Guantanamo from having be able to appeal their detention and transition to our country. He mentions, it's just incredible the stuff he mentions. He mentions that our treatment of the Indians gives him the right to go against non-nations, our treatment of these type of things. So it's not important, as you're saying, because what you're saying is really important. But when everyone says war, 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 then it allows to say, well, who declares war? Well, Obama declares escalation. Obama declares that. And you can't escalate because this is what Nixon did, and this is the sense of, we all talk about the Vietnam War and how bad it was and how this, but if you didn't have escalation, you wouldn't have had the war. So yeah.
I think some other people might want to ask some questions. I appreciate your comments. I think I got the thrust of it. I would just want to add that the Constitution, not the War Powers Act, is the supreme law of our land. And the Constitution is stronger than the War Powers Act on restricting presidential war powers and placing them in the Congress. And I think that's what we have to, that's where we have to start and work from. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I want to thank you for encouraging me to continue what I've been doing for the last 61 years since I went door to door for Harriet Truman. And
glad you get started.
To make a joyful noise about it. Thank you.
Good for you. Good for you. You're in the right place. There's a lot of pink in here. Hey.
Hi, David. Phil Restino, Vets for Peace, Central Florida. And I, too, want to first thank you. A number of us here were with you when you had that site even before after Downing Street, right when the memo came out. And just thank you for your leadership and for your fight.
Does everybody know what Phil is talking about after Downing Street?
After DowningStreet.org. Check it there, please. And what I wanted to ask, and I do agree that the focus should be local and on the members of Congress, because that is where we can actually have some effect. And also getting out in the streets to wake up the fellow constituents. But what I wanted to ask is, what can be done by citizens outside of Congress and the federal government? I mean, can you have citizen grand juries? What other tools can we do outside the Congress to take on these criminals in Washington?
Well, there is a page, as you, Phil, know very well, at AfterDowningStreet.org called ProsecuteBushCheney.org, which has a lot longer answer to this question than I could possibly give here. But there are many things that people can do, and there are civil suits that can be pursued. There are local and state-level prosecutions that are possible. Most of these crimes, not just murder of troops, which is Vince Bugliosi's approach, but warrantless spying, torture, all the rest of it, are crimes under state law as well. All you need is a prosecutor with some nerve and some decency, and you can start a prosecution locally. There are foreign and international prosecutions underway. There are a couple dozen CIA agents about to be convicted in Italy, 6 lawyers about to be indicted in Spain, we hope. Investigation underway in the United Kingdom. We should be working more with our brothers and sisters in the United Kingdom like we were when the Downing Street Minutes came out. But there are cities passing resolutions that say if these people set foot here, they will be arrested. That's helpful. And anything you can do at the local level to build media and educate is very, very helpful. And peace groups buying full-page ads in the New York Times, without which we wouldn't have these wars, instead of investing in good radio stations and websites and papers. It's just so self-destructive. So I think work the media, and still I have to say work on your House member, because they have the power to solve this mess if they chose to use it, indisputably. We just have to force them to use it, and I think we can. And I think you have a congressman here who could be, I know he's already stepped out on a couple things, which is already incredibly rare and amazing, but there's so many other places where he could be a leader, and this is a time of life and death crisis for our country, where just being better than the average Washington prostitute is not good enough.
I have a son in Iraq, and he's there by choice. And it's the hardest thing for a mother to have a child at war, but especially that's ideologically on the opposite end of the spectrum. I thought I was a good mom. I raised him as Boy Scout, raised my daughter as Girl Scout. I'm not raising my third one that way. I really feel that if we're going to change this country in the next 100 years, that we have to do it through education of our children. I've seen amazing effects in the environment. When I was in junior high, we had the first Earth Day in New York. Now, environment is taught in every science class. Kids are recycling. Young adults are doing things about the environment. How can we bring the checks and balances needed in our government into the schools, when most of the teachers that teach government, any type of political science, are for all coaches?
Yeah, well, we need to shift priorities and invest in education rather than the military and wars and weapons factories. But, maybe you've come up with a good idea. Maybe the environment is a good hook, that all these kids have learned about the poor animals and the environment. They're talking about it in school. They can learn what an opinion poll is. They could learn that everybody else agrees with them. And then they could look at what's happening in Washington, where we're not in any significant way protecting the environment. They could look at what happens in Copenhagen and study that as it happens as a current event. I think we're at the point where we have ExxonMobil paying the Heritage Foundation to put out a report saying that restricting global greenhouse gases, global warming gases, would give us $4 a gallon gasoline and increase our home energy bills. And then you have these front groups, these corporate and Republican front groups, and this international corporation called Fox News organizing these rallies for the angry people about the $4 a gallon gasoline. And then you have ExxonMobil go and publicly support the bill to make it look even worse, right? And then you have them buy up the ads in between the news stories about the grassroots movement, right? I mean, that level of corruption is the story about the environment. That is why we're going to destroy our planet. And so you can't separate the two, But it is, I think, key that, I can say anywhere, what does Article 2 of the Constitution say? Nobody can tell me. Or what's the Third Amendment? And nobody can tell me. And yet the whole thing is on one piece of paper, and all of our public officials that we elect and we go around campaigning for, they all swear an oath to it and nothing else. And we don't even know what's in it. I mean, we ought to get rid of the busy work where we go around registering voters and turning out voters. We ought to have the right to vote the minute we have the right to go kill and die, when we turn 18. And then we ought to do real activism, and we ought to do education outside of the schools if we can't get the schools to do it, because it is absolutely critical.
Hello, David.
Hi.
I'm Kathy. I'm with Code Pink Orlando, and I really appreciate you mentioning the Project for a New American Century in your Daybreak book. They're my arch nemesis, and I think they're everybody's arch nemesis. My concern with war think tanks and other such organizations that hide by a very thin veneer of nonprofit organization charity law. How can a war conspiracy cabal abuse the tax exemption laws, abuse the nonprofit organization laws, and the Department of Justice doesn't seem to know these mafia.orgs that exist right under their nose in Washington, D.C. Al Capone would be very jealous of the way they use these front operations, as you say. What can we as citizens not only do to move Congress to do what they're supposed to do, what can we as citizens move the Department of Justice to do RICO laws and other tax evasion laws that are already on the books?
Well, I agree with the concern and the need. Does everybody know what the Project for the New American Century is? Anybody not know what it is? And I think that is an angle that needs to be pursued. I've just started working with a group called Velvet Revolution on a campaign against the practices of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is not your local Chamber of Commerce. It's the biggest lobbying force. It's the biggest right-wing force in Washington that appears to be guilty of all sorts of abuses of tax and other laws, and nobody's investigating. But, how do we get the Justice Department to investigate or prosecute something? They don't work for us. We don't elect them. We don't defund them. We can't go after them in the local media. We can't effectively protest them in person without going to D.C. in huge numbers. And they've made perfectly clear through the past many years now that they work for the president. They don't work for the law. Right? When Eric Holder was at his confirmation hearing, the senators would say, "Mr. Holder, what's your view on this?" And he would say, "Senator, the president's view on that is, the president told him, you can't prosecute the higher-ups. But when it comes to these low-ranking bad apples, well, of course, it's up to you because you go by the rule of law. It's none of my business." And so I have to come back to use the media, our own media, and push things into the other guy's media, and make your Congress members represent you, because you have some control over them. We don't have any control over Eric Holder. I went and talked to him in a hearing, and he walked right up to me and said, "I hear what you're saying. You're going to be proud of your country." But I'm not. I think he said, "You're going to be proud of your government," is what he said, And I was demanding a prosecution of all of these criminals up to Bush and Cheney. He knew what I was demanding. He just walks by and lies to me and goes off. And what do I do about it? He doesn't work for me. I don't have any control over him. But I, with my friends, might be able to get my Congress member to go talk to him, or to write an op-ed, or to put out a letter or a bill or a resolution to push for what we need. And Congress can investigate any crime it wants to and drag people in and force them to testify. And in some cases can go after them with legislation and with impeachments. And should. And Congress can pressure the Justice Department to be a Justice Department much better than we can. So I think that's a tool we have to try to use. Yes, sir.
Hi, David. My name is Samuel. I never heard of you until Peter mentioned you recently.
She's good at that.
Yeah, I like the way you speak. You are very down to earth. You speak in practical terms. My question is more general. I just want to know, in your opinion, why the Democrats are not using their power as best as they can to change the face of this country?
Well, part of the answer that's generally always the case is that the Democrats are not who they claim to be. They campaign on a very different agenda from what their funders ask of them. And in Congress now, it's very, very difficult for any Democrat or Republican to go against the leader of their party. It's almost impossible. It's a rare, rare exception. And so the first answer to why did any Democrat do something is because Nancy Pelosi told them to, or Senator Reid told them to, and similarly for the Republicans. And the Republicans campaign on crazy stuff that they're never going to do about God and gays and abortion and guns and immigrants, But a lot of what they campaign on, they are going to do. And it lines up exactly with what their donors are telling them to do. Where with Democrats, it doesn't. They're pretending to be something very different from what they're paid to be, and from what their leadership is heavily paid to be. And their leadership is leadership. They've been there a long time. They're partially responsible for a lot of the wrongdoing that's gone on. They've been complicit in it. They've known about it. And right now, unlike a year ago, the Democrats in Congress see their leader as Barack Obama, the president. He's the leader of their party, even though he's supposed to be the executor of what the Congress wants. And so a president's top mandate is to not let anything happen to previous presidents and not let any power be stripped away from the presidency, because that would hurt him and his power and put him at risk. I mean, the current president is continuing renditions, possibly torture. Certainly torture is ongoing with or without approval. He's continuing illegal wars and occupations. He's launching strikes into Pakistan. He's covering up and maintaining warrantless spying programs. Why would it be in his interest to prosecute the guys who started all of this? And Senator Leahy and John Conyers and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of them, they take their orders from him. They don't have any loyalty to the Congress or to the people or to the Constitution. I mean, I can't say not any, but it's not overriding. And so we have a situation where at any given time, one party's loyalty is to the president, and the other party's loyalty is to making sure the next president is from their party. And that's the top agenda items for everybody in Washington. So, the Democrats think that they can coast along on being the non-Republicans. And this is how they've been winning elections for years now. I'm not a Republican. Vote for me. And it's been working. We've given them total power. And they want to back off from it and not use it. And they want a Republican on an awful, awful Democratic health care bill written by the health industry so that they can say it's bipartisan and blame the Republicans. Or they want to keep the filibuster in place and pretend it's being used and allow it to be used so they can blame the Republican. Oh, we couldn't do it. We wanted to, but the Republicans. But they're certainly pleasing the health insurance companies. The health insurance companies' ideal is to not pass a bill at all. Just like the Republicans' ideal openly. Of course, even if you got a bill that was so bad it was just a bailout for all the health insurance companies with no strings attached, the Republicans would still vote no because they would call it Obama's bill and vote no so they could say, ha, we beat Obama's bill. But, their ideal lines up pretty closely with what the health insurance companies want. And the same is true with too many Democrats. Not all of them. There's some of them fighting exactly as they should be. If Congressman Wiener's proposal to vote for Medicare for all gets a lot of votes, that's a step forward. That's good for round two. And if enough Democrats join the Republicans to vote this god-awful bill down, that's very good for round two. The next bill has to be better. It has to be something they'll vote for. But if they pass a bill and it's a horrendous bill, and they pretend it's healthcare reform, and they aren't going to come back to it for years because that would embarrass Obama because it was the Obama bill. And if in the meantime a bunch of them have voted for Anthony Weiner's amendment for Medicare for All, and they bragged about it, but it hasn't passed, and it won't pass the Senate, and it won't pass the President, and they quietly strip out Kucinich's amendment, which would let states do single payer. You know, and then I've talked to Congress members face to face who've said, look, the big thing is that you gotta make the big news be the Weiner amendment, because I'm going to vote for that. I don't think the Kucinich amendment is that important. I don't think you need to pay any attention to that, right? Because if they pass a bill and they have something in there that makes it easier for states to do single payer, we're going to have single payer in a half dozen states very soon. We're going to show the way how it can be done, and we're going to get it done. It's how Canada did it. But if we don't pay enough attention and we only talk about the things they talk about, they care about their own standing in the corporate media. They care about their own relationship with their party leaders. They care about their own position within the sinking ship of our republic. And they care about who's president. And they care about who gives them money. They're not all evil. They're not all heartless. But those forces are very, very powerful on them.
I'd like to say that your comment got me out of my seat. And what I would like to say is up your quote with a quote. And that is, Will Rogers said, I'm not a member of any organized party. I'm a Democrat. I think the only thing destroying the Democrats is they're selling themselves from the floor.
Do you want to expand on that, Annie? Because
I think it summarizes the Democratic Party. We have the majority. We have the right. I think you're just going to sit back and let them beat themselves to death, and when they're exhausted, you're just going to walk past them. I don't think the organization is there. I think the intent may be fine. It's a complete disorganized threat.
Well, I think there's something to that, but I don't think the ideal solution is to get them organized. Because if the Democrats had discipline and they could successfully force everybody to line up in a line like the Republicans can, then yes, they would pass some halfway health care measure, some health insurance reform as they call it now. But there would be absolutely no opposition to any wars in Congress. There would be absolutely no support for the majority of the public's position on just about any issue, because the Democratic leadership is opposed to the majority American position on just about every issue. So is the Republican leadership, and worse so. But what hope we've got comes from the more progressive members of the Democratic Party in Congress, and Senator Sanders, who's not, who resist the dictates of their party's leadership. If it was simply up to the Democratic Party leadership, then we would have the healthcare ideas that Barack Obama campaigned on. And some were good. It could even conceivably be better than nothing, but it's marginal. We wouldn't have single payer. And if we have any chance of ending any wars, it will not come from the leadership of any party. And I'm not saying destroy this party or switch back to that party or start a third party. I don't think multiplying a bad thing saves us. I think that we have to reduce the power of parties, which doesn't mean get rid of them. And most of that corruption is for money. We look at the corporate money, but the big donors are the party. And you get rid of that money, and you get rid of some of the techniques of discipline, of threatening bribes and positions and chairmanships and votes and earmarks and weapons factories in their district, and you get closer to Congress members who represent their constituents. And you know what? If you had that, there'd be a lot of Republicans voting against wars. There'd be a lot of Republicans voting for health care reform. There'd be a lot more Democrats voting the way we want them to vote if they weren't answering to any party. So I get the temptation, and I recognize the critique, and they are disorganized, and they are pathetic, and they are laughable, and they are so weak that when Alan Grayson utters a bit of truth, it's shocking. But my ideal is not party discipline.
Thanks for your inspiration and also the information in your book.
Sure.
And I think you actually just answered my question, but I'll
Sorry.
say it anyway. A while back, there was a popular notion in insurgents to have a third party in our country, and a third political party. And quickly, both the Democrats and Republicans worked together to kind of squash that. And they raised the financial requirements and changed the requirements for televised political debates and pretty much putting the kibosh on that. And I guess my question is, we did have a third party. Do you think it would bring back some of that power to Congress, or at least make issues a little bit more debatable? And I think you kind of answered that.
Well, you know, Senator Sanders is not a third party, but he's not exactly a Democrat either. He's more independent. And he's a socialist, yes. And not coincidentally, he votes better than most of his Democratic colleagues, not to mention Republicans. As you know, it's virtually impossible to start a third party. There are attempts with the Green Party, there's the Libertarian Party, there's a Constitution Party, there's the Working Families Party that runs a different sort of strategy in some states to get votes and build power. But you're locked out of getting on the ballot by tough rules. You're gerrymandered out of existence. Incumbents have financial and media powers that you don't have. It's very, very hard. And yet the same reforms that would allow a third party would also allow independent candidates. I don't know whether the organizational structure of a third party is going to help us a lot more than simply independent candidates and better organizational structure of independent activist groups. I don't know for sure, but I know that my ideal is to get rid of much of the power of parties. And if we got 3 or 4 or 5 parties, but parties still ran everything, so that we had 3 or 4 or 5 voices in Washington instead of 2, but we still didn't have 535, I don't think we would solve that much. I hope that's partially an answer. Maybe we should all talk informally and sign books and buy one for your congress member and 2 for your senators and 1 for your local library. And thank you all very, very much for coming out tonight.
We do have one more special surprise with David. Someone really wanted to see David tonight and really wants to get their book signed. If you'll just wait 2 more seconds, and may I introduce President Bush? Thank you.
Put your hands behind your head and turn around. Did you want me to explain that to you? Sheep in a Jeep. He's got a book called Sheep in a Jeep. Mr. President, could you please go back to Dallas and we'll see you there. We've got we left our handcuffs at home tonight. Thank you for coming out.
Okay, we'll quickly extinguish the chalice. The extinguished is flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you very much.